And welcome to yet another episode of Experts Speak. I'm Michael DeLon, and today I am talking with somebody who is becoming a very good friend of mine and a business partner. This is Jürgen Strauss. Jürgen, welcome to my podcast.
Thanks a lot. It's a privilege to be here with you and chat with you again, Michael.
Well, it is. And he says again, because I was on Jürgen's podcast that you're going to hear some about as a guest. And so I wanted him on my podcast because he does some really cool things for business owners that I think a lot of my audience could really benefit from. And he helps business owners with marketing and podcast development to establish credibility in the eyes of the audience. Wow, go figure. And on his website, there's this really cool quote that he has. And it says, marketing is the art and science of creating and sustaining exceptional, remarkable customer experiences and relationships. Now, Jürgen, I love that. And there are so many nuggets there we could unpack, but I just want to talk about sustaining, but also remarkable experiences and relationships. That's so important in marketing. Talk to us a little bit about that. But first, tell us a little bit about you and who you are and how did you get to do what you're doing today?
Yeah, that's a long story because I've been around for a while, but I'll try to capture it in a couple of sentences. So my background is in science, in chemistry, so hence the art and science part. I had a long career in the corporate world, and most of that time really enjoyed it because I was at the forefront of interactions with clients at very senior levels. I was kind of the technical problem solver for our products, traveling the world, getting to meet people in different countries, different cultures, learning about different cultures. And in that time, built up lots of fabulous relationships. That's kind of just the way I dealt with it. I never really thought about it until much later. After about 21 years, the whole corporate environment within our company changed. What happened was essentially the values shifted to a point where there was actually a cultural values clash with me personally. Okay. And I can say that now in hindsight. At the time, it was kind of 2 years of real pain where I still had these fabulous relationships, but I was finding that I was having to go to all these people when I met them and apologize for our company and apologize for the way our company was treating them. And I realized at that time, it took me 2 years before I realized that this was no good. I had to make a change. And when I did make a change, I went out on my own into small business, into InnovaBiz, and realized at the time that those relationships were actually really key to me personally because I really got fulfillment and enjoyment out of those, but also that they were key to me being able to still help these people in this environment of corporate clashes or clashes between the companies. And so I kind of brought into the concept of I'll help small business with their marketing because when I started in InnovaBiz, there was virtually nothing around. Small business was doing sales and being very salesy, but they weren't really thinking about marketing and strategic marketing. And so I brought systems, my scientific background in to build marketing systems, but I also brought in that concept of you've got to have the relationships there as well. It all starts with the relationships. And so that's the kind of science and art part because relationships, there's a lot of soft skill stuff there that you have to bring to bear, and empathy and understanding what the other person, what they need, what their aspirations are, what their fears and frustrations are. So those are the two things I brought together. And about 5 years into my business, a mentor of mine suggested, why don't you start a podcast? It's a great positioning exercise. And I'd been a real fan of audiobooks way back when they were still on cassette tapes, and was always listening to audiobooks when I was commuting in the car, put the cassette tape in. And then when podcasts started in the early 2000s, I became a great fan of podcasts, listened to them. Never really thought of myself as somebody that could start a podcast and do a podcast. It was always this mysterious thing. And when this mentor who had a podcast suggested it, I said, well, what do I have to do? How do I get started? And he said, come into my studio, because he had a really professional studio set up. Come into my studio. I'll walk you through all the steps, show you how it's done, and then see what you think. And he showed me all that, and I thought, wow, I could do that at home. There's nothing really magical about it. And, being a technology person and loving computers, I thought I can handle all that stuff. So I got started. And also, with all these relationships I had built up throughout my corporate career, I had a ready supply of guests to bring on to talk about innovation, which was the theme of the podcast in the early days. It was focused very much on innovation and people doing amazing things. And what I found was people had such a great time having the conversation with me, so there was a remarkable experience. Yes. They said, you should talk to so-and-so, I'll introduce you. And all of a sudden, within 2 years, I think we got to 100 episodes, and I got to meet probably half of those people, maybe even 2/3 of those people who I'd never met before. And they became new connections, new friends in many cases, and some of them very high-profile guests that I never thought would give me the time of day. They didn't know me from Adam, and all of a sudden I said, hey, would you love to come on my podcast, talk about these things? And, oh yeah, sure.
Well, yeah, and you sparked something right there. And one of the from a marketing perspective, having a podcast does a lot of things. It positions you very differently than your competitors, because most of your competitors don't have a podcast. But it does open up the doors for you to invite what I call centers of influence as a guest, because you're talking about them and letting them talk about themselves. And I mean, that's my favorite topic in the world, Jürgen, is me. And so you ask me a question, I can talk all day long about me, but it's really bringing them on to expose them to your audience and share with them, but you start building that relationship.
That's right.
That's so important. So talk about how a business owner that you work with, or somebody listening to this, how could they use a podcast to really elevate themselves, whether they're a financial advisor, an attorney, a car shop owner. I mean, it really doesn't matter what industry you're in. How do you help business owners understand the marketing aspect and the podcasting and the credibility that brings and all of that? Talk to somebody who's listening to this going, yeah, I've thought about podcasting. I don't know how it would work.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to unpack there. How can podcasting help your business? I mean, for me, there's two key things there. It's grown my network, and as a result of that, it's grown my business. So the podcast directly hasn't grown the business, and hence, the idea of building and sustaining relationships. What the podcast has done is allowed me to grow my network. I've met lots of people, and as a result of that, people have referred business to me because they've been guests on my podcast and we built this relationship. Or they've said to me, hey, I'm doing this thing, would you like to participate in that, whether it's a summit or whether it's an opportunity to do a joint venture, or like we're doing, sharing with our lists the information that we do, for example, having regular webinars, which just expands our reach in terms of the message that we want to share with an ideal audience. So they're the things that I think, if you focus on creating that exceptional experience for both the guests that you have on your podcast and the listener of the podcast, then and sustaining that experience and following up and growing those relationships that you build as a result, that's where the business comes from. It's not, the days are gone where, and this is a mistake that people still make today when they launch a podcast. They say, we'll get to 1 million listeners or 1 million downloads and we'll get sponsorship, or people will want to advertise and we'll earn a lot of money from the podcast directly. Those days are gone, because there are people like John Lee Dumas and Pat Flynn, who started 15 years ago in podcasting. And in those days, yes, that was certainly the favorite way to get the money. But
Yeah.
because of where podcasting is today, that really, there's too many podcasts around to go chasing advertising dollars or go chasing sponsorships.
Well, there are, and I want to talk about that because if you go to iTunes or wherever and you search podcast, right? I mean, there are lots of podcasts. And what I try to help people understand is you don't have to have a podcast for everybody. In fact, you shouldn't. You should know your audience, and your podcast is for your audience. And the other thing that you mentioned there is these high profile people that you've been able to interview and begin a relationship with them from a business standpoint. If I called you up, Jürgen, and said, "Hey, Jürgen, I want to have a conversation with you. Can we have coffee?" What's the first thing that goes through your mind? It's like, well, what do you want? Right. Yeah. And you start moving away from me versus if I send you an email or something, say, "Hey, Jürgen, I've been watching you on InnovaBiz and could I interview you on my podcast?" Now you're moving toward me. And it opens a relationship that you just said you start there, but then you have follow-up. You engage, you see how we could serve one another. And pretty soon, you're right, the business starts coming your way, but it really is an indirect method of growing your business.
Yeah, that's right. Very much. And I like to say that my podcast, I really love doing it. I really enjoy it. I get to speak to an expert each episode, and I get to ask whatever questions I want to ask. I get to have whatever conversation I want to have with that person. So I say it's like a 1-hour masterclass with an expert in their field. So I always learn something, and I learn something that's very specific to me. It's not a course that person's put together that may touch a couple of key points that I need to know or I'm interested in. It's very specific to me because I ask them questions. I say, "Oh, I don't understand that exactly. Can you explain that, or can you give me an example of that, how that works?" Right. And so by the end of that hour, I've got all this extra knowledge, and then I get to share it with my audience, and they think I'm a hero because I've brought all this stuff to them, but I've only just learned it as well.
That's right. Yeah. And that's the other aspect is I've met people, I'm sure you have too, that say, "A podcast, I have to do how many episodes?" Well, that's up to you. You could do one a week, you could do one every, it doesn't matter. But I have to prepare all this stuff. It's like, no, you invite people and you have conversations. I mean, that's this is a great format. Any business owner could do this.
That's right. And I love the way you do it also with a book. With the book publishing and having a podcast as part of the book launch. So you have one episode per chapter or one episode per topic content. And I think that's brilliant because if you think about it, there's so many people in business that they've either written a book or they write a regular blog post or they write a regular newsletter or some other content that they publish regularly as part of their day-to-day marketing or day-to-day positioning in the marketplace. And there's all this content. Now they could take that content and produce a podcast with it. And if they're concerned, and I find it challenging to do a solo podcast in a way that's as engaging as a conversation like this. So get somebody to have a conversation with. Get somebody to ask you, tell me about chapter 1 of your book, exactly the way you do it.
Absolutely. Or reverse engineer that, have your podcast interview, and then send the email out and make this interview part of your blog post, right? So instead of just reverse engineer it, that way you do a podcast and now you multiplied where that podcast can go. Right, yeah. It's not rocket science. It's just getting out there and doing it and starting with a little bit of vision and a little bit of strategy, but realize it's not about downloads. It's about relationships.
That's right. And reaching the right audience, as you said.
Yes. Yeah, and they're all over the place. I mean, the other thing that you do is you host, these networking events for podcasters and different things where I've met lots of people who have podcasts, people who want to be on my podcast, and I've had them on there. And it's building a network, which we've all done through chambers of commerce or BNI group or whatever, because we know that I only know a certain number of people, but if I meet Jürgen, well, Jürgen knows 100 people that now I can start to know. And podcasting is just a phenomenal way to meet lots of people, to share content and to talk with experts and learn from them and share that information with your audience. Because again, yeah, your audience looks at you and says, man, I love this. I get comments all the time about my episodes, and people are like, hey, that was a great episode. I really enjoyed that. Great. Yeah. That makes me feel wonderful that I'm bringing value to them in an area that I don't have that much expertise in many times, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And then, so let's talk about what about some, I want to say follow-up, right? How do you do relational follow-up with a guest? What are some ideas that a business owner should be thinking about? Okay, I've got somebody on my podcast. We had a great conversation. How do I keep that relationship going without feeling like I'm selling them something, right?
Yeah, great question. Well, this is where I bring in my science part and my process background, and I have a bunch of follow-up things that I do that essentially I have a reminder system that says, okay, it's time to do this one now. So when I have somebody on the guest, and you would have experienced a lot of this already, when I have somebody on as a guest, immediately after I finish the interview, I will write a series of social media posts with their photo and some text over the top that says, I had a great conversation with Michael talking about how to easily publish your book and how to turn that book into a powerful business tool that gets you a whole lot more business. So something like that I might have put on social media and post it, and then I tag that person. So I kind of initiate a conversation on the social media, and of course a lot of people see that post on the social media, so they're anticipating the publication of that particular podcast episode. Then I also send them an immediate thank you message, and I've switched there. I used to have kind of a standard message where I just put in a kind of 2 sentences of personalized stuff that related back to our conversation and any follow-up there. I've switched that now to an audio message. I thought, well, podcaster, audio, right? That makes a lot of sense. Yes. So, and it's a lot quicker. So I send an audio message with some additional information, like, here's where you can give me feedback, and here's where you can review the podcast if you'd love to do that. I'd love to get you to review the podcast. So that's my immediate follow-up. Then between 3 and 7 days later, I will send them a video thank you greeting. So I actually just fire up my video camera, get on video and say, hey, Michael, I really enjoyed our conversation. I loved talking about book publishing. I think that what you do is fantastic. I think it's brilliant that you take podcasting into that and use the content of the book to produce essentially however many chapters there are podcast episodes without any additional work on the part of the book author. So it's a great way to promote the podcast. Really love it. Let's stay in touch. Let's keep it going. Here's the details of when the podcast publishes and anything else that I can think of at the time. So it's like a 2 to 3 minute video that takes me about exactly that much time to do. So easy.
Which I want to pause right there, because I use a company called Loom, Loom, right, to do a very similar thing, to do short video messages out to just all kinds of people. And the power of that, the personal nature of that, when you sent that to me, and even the audio went, I thought, well, that's really cool. That's probably the first audio email I've gotten. But when you send those, when you do those, they come across as so genuine, because you're not reading a script to say, thank you, Michael, for being on my podcast. It's not that at all. And I don't fight. I challenge business owners every week to go, relax. Be yourself.
Exactly, yeah.
And it makes such a big difference. So talk about that as far as the podcast. I listened to a podcast the other week, Jürgen. I had to turn it off. It was just too stuffy, and they were just trying to be so professional and so just right on. And it's like, it's not you. Just, I want talk to us about the genuine nature of a podcast and how to connect personally and build that experience really through a podcast, because most podcasts are not video. They're on the phone. They're audio.
Just audio.
How do you connect with somebody through audio? We do it like this. But what kind of tips or things have you learned about?
Yeah, well, one of the things I mentioned earlier that I still struggle with a solo episode because I'm still stilted, believe it or not, after so many years of podcasting.
Yeah.
And sometimes I do kind of a series of about 10 and then I pause it again because I'm just not happy with it. And my solo podcast is pretty well that sort of frequency, and it's on pause at the moment again.
Yeah.
The thing that I find with a conversation like this is, as you say, just relax and have a conversation with the person. So when I have guests on my podcast, I now regularly have them do a pre-interview. Somebody said yesterday to me, "Did I pass the audition?" I said, "It's not really an audition." It is in a way, because I'm very protective of my audience. So I'm not going to bring anybody on because I want to ensure that they're a fit for the subjects and my audience, and also that they're here to add value to my audience. So it is in some ways an audition, but the primary purpose of that 15-minute short call is for us to get to know one another, so that when we get onto the podcast recording, it's like a couple of old friends coming on to have a conversation. And that's the way I approach it. I get on there and say, this is just a conversation. In the early days when I started my podcast, I had this really long script.
Right.
And I would spend hours preparing every episode, saying, okay, what's the opening question? Well, something like, tell us about your background. How did all this get started? That's not a bad question. I've got better ones now. But then I would think, well, what would be a logical next question? How might they answer that? What would be a logical? And I would script out the whole thing like a play, like a performance. And it would have to follow that script. And I'd then be married to that script. And a lot of those were very stilted. What I found as I started listening back to some of the episodes, the people that I mentioned earlier that I'd built these relationships with in my corporate career that I knew really well, and there was this, hey, old friend, we're having a conversation aspect to it. Whilst I'd scripted out their episodes as well and spent hours on them, I went off script immediately on there because it was a conversation between a couple of old friends or old colleagues. And that's how I approach every episode. It's really, as if I'm meeting my friend in the coffee and I say, how's things going? And tell me more about that. And, I've started coining this term now from our Make Marketing More Human theme is podcast like you're human.
I love it. Oh, but it's that's refreshing, because if we met in a coffee shop, it would be very relaxed and I wouldn't have a script, right? And that's really because too many times scripting it out puts pressure on you, the host, but it also puts pressure on the guest. And it's like, no, I don't want you to feel pressure. I want you to feel relaxed, because I want to pull from it. I'm going to ask you what I call softball questions. They're just really easy. You already know the answers to them. No surprises. I want to prop you up and let you share your expertise. And really, I want you to share some stories, right? And that's what really captivates people. But putting your guest at ease, I used to send out, and we may still do this, a list of like 8 questions that I'm going to answer. And I'm like, I don't even ask those anymore, because we get to the salient issues. We get to the important things that my audience is interested in through conversations. And I never know where it's going to go, because you just said something a little bit ago. And I'm like, oh, I want to talk about that, right? You didn't know I was going to talk about that. But that's the beauty of having experts on. It doesn't matter. You know the answers.
That's right. The other beauty, I mean, it's funny you say, sending out the documents. We send out a document in advance to prep our guests as well. And it's really important. Make the guest feel comfortable. That's part of that exceptional experience. When the guest comes onto the show, they need to feel as though this is going to be an easy conversation. And I already know you because we met on that short call, and they've got the background information at hand. Now, one of my guests this week said to me, there's a couple of questions on your list that I don't feel qualified to answer, so let's avoid those. And he mentioned the questions. Are they still on there? I haven't reviewed that document for ages. And I said, I'm gonna, as soon as we're done here, I'm gonna go and review that document, edit it, pull out. And then I found about 10 questions that I had listed there, none of which I've asked for years. And I think I'll just delete the entire questions and rephrased it. This is a conversation. We're going to touch on what you've given me as your key points that you cover, your areas of expertise, and then we'll try to get some stories, examples. Yeah.
Well, and the other aspect is like this podcast, my podcast is about 25 minutes, 30 minutes in length. It's not hard to cover 25 minutes of content in a short conversation, right? So your podcast as a business owner, you don't have to do an hour. I've listened to some podcasts that are 3 to 5 minutes. That's all they do. They do a series of short. Well, that's good. If that's your podcast format, go there. There are no rules or regulations.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, there's lots of different ways you can do it, so it's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I was also going to point out that when I learnt, hey, I don't need to script every episode, and part of that was trusting myself to say, okay, Michael has a book publishing business. He publishes books. He does podcasts as part of that. He helps people market their books and hence market their business with the books. So once I have that little bit of information, and then I might look up your LinkedIn profile or listen to a couple of podcasts you've done with other hosts so that I don't necessarily cover the same ground, but maybe I'll discover some secrets. Like, for example, you've got your sons in your business helping out and you're a very religious person. So I've got a couple of more personal things that I can touch on if I need to. And then I just trust myself that we're going to have a good conversation. And if something comes up, I say, oh, that's right, your son's in the business, and we can talk about that. How do you work with family in the business? That might be a topic we then explore or whatever. There's a whole lot of things. And often I find myself, I target sort of 30 minutes and then I have a buzz round of 5 questions that usually take about 10 minutes on top of that. But often I find in that 30 minutes, we run out of time. Because, hey, I did want to ask you about that, but let's save that for another time.
Yes.
And what I've found in doing that is that my preparation time no longer is several hours per episode. I can do it in less than an hour now.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I mean, I do listen to some of the podcasts while I'm walking or while I'm commuting, so I kind of multitask with those.
Well,
but
absolutely.
The actual preparation time itself is cut much shorter.
Yeah, well, and that's one reason we added podcasting is because it's portable. It's very challenging to take a book on a walk with you when you're walking your dog. You run into a tree or something, but I can listen, or I can listen while I'm driving. And so that was one of the reasons we inserted that into our process, because not just the credibility of having a podcast, but it's the fact that it's portable, it's with us, and it's audio, and I connect. So there are so many different aspects. And I know on your website, which is innovabiz.co.com or .com.au.
You can go to .co. It gets you to the same place.
All right, and that's going to be in the show notes because you're in Australia.
That's right.
Right. Okay, got to get the right country, which is really cool. And I just lost my train of thought. Oh, on your website, you've got a free. Is it a master class?
Yeah. It's a short class which essentially gives you the first 4 steps of our marketing program, and it essentially is the same as what we have for our podcasting program. And we've got the system in 12 steps. It's kind of drawn like a flywheel, because I like to say that once you get started on this podcasting journey and you do it right with the sustainable relationship part, it is like a flywheel. It's almost unstoppable for me now. I can't imagine stopping the podcast. I'd be flooded with people saying, when's the next episode coming out, from listeners, and I'd be flooded with people saying, when are you going to do another season so we can come on? We'd love to be a guest on the show.
That's right, which is a great position to be in, right? Because people are looking to you as the expert, as the curator of content. It's a great position to be on because everybody knows you. Right. And so who are they going to refer business to? Well, you need to talk to Jürgen. He's got all this stuff. And if you go to Jürgen's, when you go to Jürgen's website, you got some podcast episodes there. You've got lots of great information. So I just think it's fascinating what you do and how you've put this together. I love the flywheel analogy because we call it a marketing flywheel, right? You get that thing rolling and it just keeps going. And that's what connects the engine in a car to the transmission, right? Is that flywheel that makes it all work together so that you'll go, which is what we want to do. So where can they find that? You tell them the website, because I slaughtered it. Sorry.
Okay. Well, it's Innovabiz, INNOVABIZ.co. You can go to .co and that will take you there. And as Michael said, we call it the Marketing Mastery mini class. So there's 4 modules in that class that we start off with a self-assessment. So who are you? What are your values? What kind of culture do you have inside your business, in your personal culture? And what is it that you're bringing to the world? What's the message you have? What's the service or product that you have? And how's that going to make a difference? So that's kind of the first step, really getting clear about that. Then the second one is, well, who is it that you can help? Who's the dream customer? Mm-hmm. And in the case of podcasting, who's the dream audience? And then the third one is, where's the connection between those two? What is it that the dream customer needs that you can actually deliver on? So, making sure that if you make a promise, that you're going to be delivering on that promise, creating those exceptional and sustainable experiences and relationships. And then the fourth one is crafting the message. How do you craft that message? So whether that's a podcast or whether it's in your marketing programs, that will actually speak to that dream customer, speak to their issues that they're looking to solve, and establish that connection, begin the conversations to take you into the next step of the flywheel.
Absolutely. So you want to reach out to his website, to Jürgen's website. It'll be in the show notes, of course, but take advantage of that, because so many times people don't dive into who they are and your core values. And that's really, really important as you create your marketing message, so that there's congruency there. And so starting with yourself, looking at your target audience, looking at your offer, all of that, a very, very good course for you to take. So reach out to him, innovabiz.co will get you there. And it'll be in the show notes as well. Jürgen, man, I have enjoyed it. I love podcasting, as you know. You're a master at it. You've put together a phenomenal program. So I want to encourage people who are listening, if you just have the inkling you haven't launched your podcast, you're not sure what to do, you're thinking about it, check him out. Go to innovabiz.co and see what he's got available and how you can grow and use podcasting to grow your business, because that's what's happened to us. That's what happened to you, Jürgen, and the many clients that you've served, right?
Yeah, exactly. Thanks a lot for that, Michael. And this has been a privilege. And also check out my conversation with Michael on the InnovaBuzz podcast. I don't remember exactly which episode it was, but it was one of the last 20, I'd say.
20 or so, yeah. So your podcast is really fun. His website's InnovaBiz. His podcast is InnovaBuzz. And so you can find that on iTunes and Spotify and Google. Yeah. Anywhere a podcast can be found, you will find InnovaBuzz podcast. Listen to Jürgen, because he interviews all kinds of people who are really more interesting than me. But we had a great conversation as well. So check that out. We'll make sure that's in the show notes as well. And Jürgen, I appreciate you being here. It's always fun to be with you. So
thanks, Michael. I really enjoyed this.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for sharing your knowledge with us, buddy. You take care. We'll be in touch soon.
You too. Look forward to it.